Recording in progress.
Hey, we are live on YouTube, eh? Okay. We got this champ. Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Hi, Frederick. Here we are in one of our amazing sessions in the session number 9. And this is really important for us and for the planet and for everyone, because we are celebrating something impressive that just took place in my home country in Latin America. But it's an example for the rest of the planet, because I don't know if you were aware that there was important day that was taking place in Ecuador, a referendum where democratically the people of one country was able to decide for their own land and for how, if we want to continue exploiting and living from oil, or if we want to go for the future, if we want to protect nature, if we want to protect the jungle, if we want to protect the Amazon, and also, of course, the indigenous people. And that's why we are really, really happy to start these sessions that is called Indigenous Rights, with these amazing videos that the people like Elena Walinga was sharing to make this possible. So let's take a look at them. Yes to life, yes to the Yasuni. And this was one of the amazing campaigns that people all over the world was sharing in English, in Spanish. Different activists around the planet has been sharing this, and the indigenous people didn't make these videos alone. A lot of people is always working together. That's why it's so important that we are getting trained now. And now we are gonna hear from our amazing friend Elena Walinga and how she was celebrating the fact that Ecuador finally voted yes for life and yes for Yasuni.
In
Elena
a historic
Walinga.
referendum, Ecuador just voted out fossil fuels from the Amazon rainforest, from Yasuni. This sets an incredibly important precedent for the country because it shows that we are ready for a transition. Even though we are a country that's considered dependent on oil, we have shown that we want a different future for the Amazon, for indigenous peoples. This is a moment for the world to learn and follow into Ecuador's footsteps as we are making this very brave decision as a country to move on from fossil fuel dependency.
Great, 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 great. So it's something that we want to celebrate. And now we are starting this impressive session, Indigenous Rights, together with the Global Youth Climate Training, 13 weeks of free training by global experts. And we want to thank you, of course, Oxford Net Zero. And wait, I'm a bit lost here. Oh, what happened here? Whoa, 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 whoa.
In a historic referendum, Ecuador just voted out fossil fuels.
Technical problems. We can have technical problems, but now we also have Yasuni, so it's okay. Welcome again. Sorry for that. And so this is the week number 9, and we are going to talk today about Indigenous rights and climate change, a really important topic for all of us. We are going to have impressive speakers today, and we want you to be part of our learning process, and we want to hear from you guys. So don't forget to take out your phones and make some Instagram stories or post in LinkedIn, and don't forget to tag us, the Global Youth /Co, and in Twitter as well. But also don't forget our important partner that without them we cannot make this possible, Oxford Net Zero, as well in LinkedIn. And you can use our hashtags GYC or Global Youth Training 2023. Today, our moderators, myself, Agustin, that you also know as Pacha Tupac, together with Frederick Binamungo, that we are going to be hosting this today with these impressive speakers that are joining us today. And don't forget the rules of engagement, and the most important for not just the program in life: respectful language, inclusivity, respect your time, and be sure that we will have some Mentimeter today going on. And the agenda of today, we are having our first speaker, Milka Chepkorir, and then Xananine Ramirez. We are going to have also some QA questions, and then we are having an impressive performance, Eric Marqui Terena from Brazil, and finally with Ana Eloisa Romero Flores is what we are having today. So be ready for what's coming. And now, before we jump into the first speaker, I would like you to take your phone if you have, and you're gonna open a link that we are sharing also right now in the chats. We are sharing you this open document. What are we gonna do here? We wanna listen from you. What are the key takeaways from today's speakers? What do you think we should highlight from today's session? We want to hear from all of you. So open this document. Feel free to note whatever you think is important, and you will find the name of the speaker so we can keep it like in certain order, right? I don't know, let's wait a bit till you can like make a photo of this. But if you cannot use your QR code, don't worry. Don't panic. You have your link. The link is also in the chats, and we are sharing. I will also try to share it in the, if someone can provide me here. I'm gonna share it as well in the Slack group, because don't forget that we have a Slack. If you are still not there, that's a bit disappointing. You have to come to the Slack as well. And okay, now let's continue, and finally starting with our amazing speaker, Milka Chepkorir, member of the Sengwer Indigenous Peoples of Cherang'any Hills. I would like, Milka, if you correct me if I'm telling it correctly. Kenya, she's from Kenya, policy and advocacy co-coordinator from Africa ICCA. Milka, please join us and enlighten us with your knowledge and your experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Augustine, and thank you for the very wonderful introduction. And just to say that I like how you say my name, Chepkorir, because it is exactly how we say it. I've never had someone else of the other native languages saying it that nicely. And thank you, colleagues, for the invitation into this great webinar this evening, at least for me. It's a pleasure, of course, to speak, especially to the youth, about issues affecting Indigenous people. Myself being a youth, I think I think being in the Indigenous people struggle make me feel like I'm old, because I've been in the struggle for long enough to see not so good things about the issues of conservation and now the issues of climate change affecting us and us being the solution to climate change and how we are perceived in all of this. So it feels good really to speak to my age mates, my age groups on these issues and being Indigenous youth really. And with that, allow me just to go back and directly to the key pointers that I was asked to speak about this evening. And that even as what is happening in Ecuador, what happened in Montreal last year about the global biodiversity framework, and all the discussions happening around climate change, it is clear that Indigenous people's efforts, Indigenous people's way of life is what has kept the planet sane this far, at least. And that most of the biodiversity is in Indigenous people's territories. And so when we talk about the role and what Indigenous people are doing to keep the planet balanced, it doesn't go without saying the land. It's not what Indigenous people are doing in the air. It is what happens on the land and what we do as Indigenous people on our lands to keep our land healthy, not just for ourselves, but for the whole world. And so it brings us, of course, all this discussion go back to the issue of conservation, and then conservation organizations come through, conservation funds come in as well. And everybody is talking about conserving some percentage of the world by this time. First is because they acknowledge that the world hasn't been conserved. Through the development projects that we've had, we have destroyed the planet. Through very many other things, in the name of development, there has been a lot of destruction. And that is why Indigenous people with their territories are sometimes perceived as less developed, backward, the ones that need to be taught, forgetting that it is all the steps of the strategies of development, the industrialization, and the globalization processes that has led the planet to where we are feeling the climate change crisis that we have today. And so with that, especially organizations in the North and in the West, conservation organizations have for decades now come up to say, we need to conserve this, we need to conserve that. Sadly, it involves less of conserving in the places that are not for Indigenous people. And so all interest is going back to the territories and the lands of Indigenous people. And it is bizarre to correct more where a problem is not in and run directly to where problems are not in, to want to start the correction process. It's like, I will give an example of somebody that has stolen, or a group of people that have stolen and have been known to have stolen, and a group of people that are not known to have stolen and they haven't stolen. And then you want to start the correctional strategies on the people that have not stolen. So for this case, let's use the Indigenous people as the people who have not stolen and the general world as the people who have stolen. So what conservation organizations and the conservation funds that come with are all focusing on the places that are conserved and not looking at how do we correct the places that have already been destroyed to return them back to conserved nature. Being in Kenya and being a Sengwer Indigenous person, we have experienced so much of the negatives that comes with what these conservation organizations and the conservation funds bring to our land in the name of we are fighting climate change, by this time, this is what we need to be doing, disregarding totally what we have been doing on our lands to keep our land healthy and to keep our trees standing and to keep, the planet actually still breathing. Unfortunately, just how power is evil sometimes is that governments work with these organizations and then pass through very discriminative laws that are then used against us Indigenous people on our territories. And so what do the laws come to do? They come to criminalize our existence on our land. They come to criminalize our access to our land. They come to criminalize our access to our traditional herds. They come to criminalize or take away even the water resources from a land to sell it to other people and to deprive us of enjoying that same right to water. How they do it is using the systems. Here in Kenya, for example, the Kenya Forest Service has been using, for a long time, has been using an old law that does not recognize our being in the forest. This is despite the fact that when the colonial government left Kenya, they left us in the forest. They actually pushed us into the forest, took all our plain lands and pushed us into the forest. And so when the forests were being gazetted as public lands, we were in the trees, we were in the forests. And so these laws that criminalize our being in the forest are then used to evict us from our lands, from our forests. I'm sure it's not it's not very, very unique. There are many other communities being evicted, either from their forests or from their rangelands where they graze their livestock if they are pastoralists. And that is actually where I personally came into, the crying out for the rights of my community to our indigenous ancestral lands, because it's where our great-grandparents have been buried. It's where we have lived. But then just all of a sudden, because decisions have been made in the UN and the government has some laws that support whatever they want to do with or mitigating climate change, then they come to evict us from the lands that we have lived all these years, and it is supported by conservation organization. It beats the logic. It takes us back to who defines what conservation is, Because for Indigenous people, honestly, when we hear the word conservation, it sounds like an enemy to us. The word, not the meaning. Because the word, according to the people who coined it, I think they just imagine that there should be no people in a place for a place to be conserved. And it is translated to what we experience when we are on our land, in our forest, and we are being evicted from that land for someone else to come and put more efforts and new methods and science to conserve a land that we have conserved through our ways of life, our traditions, our norms, our clan systems that tell us where we put our beehives, where we collect our herbs, where we collect our water, where we do not inhabit at all, and where we have our traditional rituals, That is how we have conserved our land. But according to others who think we are not doing conservation, now they are advising governments, advising people passing conventions, international laws to ignore what we have been doing. Fortunately, there's been the recognition of Indigenous people's role in conservation over time and even in international laws. But there's a huge collusion between the real practice, especially in Africa, real practice and what the international law says. Sometimes even real practice and what the national law says. I'll give an example of Kenya, for example. The forests, the constitution is clear on the rights of indigenous people to their land and the right of indigenous people to inhabit their forests, their traditional lands, and to conserve them as they have been doing. But the minds of the governments and the officials running government are still super colonized, still behaving the same way the Brits behaved when they were on our land, to keep us out of our land, to conserve it. Which beats logic, because the reality is sometimes these people get us out of our land so that they get more, like they get the eyes out of the land so that they can do what they want to do on our lands, log our forests, get the minerals from these forests, get the water for their benefit without communities looking at them. So the best way to create a place where they can just do these things without being questioned is to kick communities out. Then you ask yourself, at the beginning, we thought conservation is what we are working towards. So kicking communities out is conservation, but kicking communities out to log forests is still conservation? Of course, no. Then it just shows how, sorry, I can't find the right word, the rot in the society and the rot in the governance systems against indigenous people's ways of life. Unfortunately, again, informed by an education system that does not acknowledge that the indigenous ways of life and indigenous education system is education enough. So that we have to put our brains away for someone else to determine whether what we are doing is conservation or not. And often at times, what we indigenous people are doing is not conservation according to them. Why do they say that? So that they can control the land that we are on. So that they can get funds and say, we are going to build the capacity of indigenous people on how to conserve. No. We have conserved these lands, and that is why you go to the Amazon, you go to Gabon in Masai, you come to Kenya in Mau, in Mount Elgon, go wherever there's a thick forest, nice conserved places, is because they are inhabited by indigenous people. Then it beats logic. Why conservation organization and experts would want to build curricula to build the capacity of indigenous people on conservation? It beats logic, really. What is education? Who is an educator? Is it just the education that comes from the North and the West? Is it then time maybe to learn from indigenous people on what conservation is? Of course, and just throw away the initial, meaning of the word conservation, if it was coined against what Africans, what indigenous people are doing to keep, to guard, and to sustainably use resources. And having been, in the United Nations discussions about climate change, about conservation, and seeing the representatives of conservation organization attending these forums, it hurts me. It really hurts me deep to learn, to know that even the representation of indigenous people is not valued. You'll find a lot of these organizations within the systems representing indigenous people or going to those platforms to speak for indigenous people. Why? Because the systems themselves are excluding. They really do not want to bring Indigenous peoples issues on board. I will not say that this is a really something that is completely exclusive of Indigenous people, but many of the, especially the big conservation organizations exclude Indigenous people's participations. It is them speaking for Indigenous people, representing Indigenous people. And most of the time, because again, they go there to get the conservation funds, they wouldn't say something that an Indigenous person would do that will cost them a grant because it is the right thing to say. What they would do is rather not say that thing as long as they can get the grant to continue running their conservation organization strategies and whatnot. And there was a study that came out, I think it was in 2021, I'll try and check it out, that really shows that only 1% of conservation funds reach Indigenous people. Tells you, where does it go to? To the conservation organizations that are led not by Indigenous people, led by people in the north and in the west, speaking, representing Indigenous people, working on the territories of Indigenous people to do what? Conservation, but not acknowledging what Indigenous people are doing. Anyway, I think we can say so much about that, but I'll now go to the other issue that we have been working on, especially myself being a young Indigenous woman, being especially in the struggle and in, having a gendered inclusion of especially Indigenous people within systems, within governments, within even the conservation agenda, has been a struggle. One, because of ourselves as Indigenous people. Many of the Indigenous peoples organizations in Africa, as opposed to the ones in Amazon, are very, very patriarchal. And there's just some kind of an automatic exclusion of women. And so with time, we've been able to bring on the inclusion of women in the community leaderships, in the conservation discussions within ourselves. And mainly, it is not about the discussions per se, but acknowledging the role that different genders are bringing into what enables conservation within our territories as Indigenous people. So what I personally did within my own community was to, these issues of evictions have been being very perennial, and over time it's been the male elders from our community going to the government officials to negotiate, or to a conservation organization to negotiate. It's been always not successful, often not successful. And because when I attended one of them, I think it was in September 2013, it was evident that the people coming from the government side and the people coming from our community were all male. And so when they argued on the table about issues, whether we need to be left on our land or be kicked out and all that, there was a masculine fight over these issues, and led to, others leaving the table, others banging the table and just leaving. And I went back to my elders to ask them, what if we bring our mothers into these tables? Will the other males from the other side hit the table against women? Of course they wouldn't. This being an African setting, it's a shame for the male side to hit a table and walk away from a woman, a table that includes women. And so I asked them, maybe this is the reason why we haven't been able to address these eviction issues. How about we go back home and just have 2 or 3 of our mothers into the council that goes to negotiate? They agreed for that. And the next time they went for a negotiation, there wasn't banging of tables. There was people listening, because then women are able to convey more on what we go through during evictions than how men would be able to communicate the same. And so there was a success at the first step, and gradually there's been inclusion of especially older women, because they bring more experience of the past into these negotiations, and myself and others who are younger bringing professional effort and supporting the process going forward. It hasn't been easy, but it's the work that we do, because if we don't do it, then we don't exist as Indigenous people. It is the roots that we are anchored on, that we have a land that is called by our names, and that we are staying on to connect to our ancestors. And so it doesn't matter our age, it doesn't matter whether we are eloquent enough, it doesn't matter whether we are male or female. It is a struggle for all of us, and that's why we are in it, male and female, from the Sengwer community. And as you've heard, of course, the eviction is coming because we are claiming our rights to our land that is being deprived from us. The eviction is coming, and it is getting us away from our rich sources of water and other resources that we have in our territories. The evictions are coming with a lot of violations. There's been numerous rape cases during evictions by the either people who just want to take advantage, or by the government officials. Sometimes there's been issues of excessive use of power and people being shot at. And there was a case where the Kenya Forest Service guards actually shot and killed one of our community members just for being in our territory in Embobut Forest. There's been threats and attacks over one of our own, the advocates of the community land rights, for recording and for sharing on what is happening on our land. There's just so much evil that comes with these evictions. And so you would say, if we just stayed on our land and lived on our land peacefully, there wouldn't be these violations of what we would say basic human right. But actually having your land to be able to access your water, to be able to breathe the clean air that comes from the trees is the most basic human right, right? Because if you deprive a community in the very developed parts of Japan, say, or the US, if they do not get clean water, if they do not get clean air, what do the world say? The governments have deprived these people of their human right, But for us Indigenous people, it starts from our land. That is our first human right, to be able to be on our land, to be able to live on our land, and to be able to pass on our knowledge of conserving this land and preserving this land and using our resources to the next generation. And you realize what we have realized in our community is that now with these evictions, there's been so much violations. And leave alone that, how much we are losing as a community is not just our resources, it's not just our anchorage to our land, but we are losing so much of our knowledge and the opportunity to pass on that knowledge to the next generation. Why? Because we have our elders really getting depressed by these actions, by not being left to be on our land. And so many of them are dying so rapidly. What I would like to describe that to be is that we have our libraries on fire. Honestly speaking, they are the rich sources of the knowledge of our communities. And through depression, through everything that is happening in our communities in the name of let's conserve these lands or kick them out, let's address climate change, we are losing our knowledge, we are losing our people, we are losing opportunities to be with our elders and learn this knowledge, be it passed to us and then from us to the younger generations. And what comes with this loss of knowledge is that then these conservation organizations and the so-called experts are coming back to want to teach us how to conserve, instead of really taking this opportunity to learn from our elders and to learn from us as Indigenous people on how best to conserve. Listening and knowing what Indigenous people are doing across the world to keep the planet sane And seeing what happened in Ecuador the other day gives us so much pride and so much hope that I hope the world will change what capacity building has been for so long. It's time to revert capacity building. It's time for the people who think they're so learned to learn from Indigenous people on climate change. Because everything that the general world is telling us about how to address climate change is taking us further into more diverse and more intense effects of this climate change. So addressing climate change needs unlearning. And even if not unlearning of the bad ways, then it should be new learning, fresh learning from Indigenous people's ways of life that has conserved. I would say to any conservation expert out there that we don't really conserve according to what you think. We don't conserve, of course, because we don't, according to the definition of we don't conserve because we don't have guns around, we don't fence our. It is how, my apologies, it is how we live that conserves. It is how we collect our herbs that conserve. It is how we are connected to the different regions on our land that conserves. It's the rituals, it's the taboos, it's the norms that we have against, don't do this on this land. We have to do this to sustain. We have to pass this knowledge to these generations. It is the ceremonies that we have on our lands that conserve. So if conservation is not what other people think we are doing, then they need to learn. Yeah, it's the whole reason why they need to unlearn and learn and reverse capacity building. It's time for the West and the North to learn from us. Thank you so much.
What a topic, Milka. You are so impressive, so delighted. I'm looking here on the back, just Shannon, so how she gets inspired, and she doesn't get inspired so easily. So, but I forgot to mention what's Milka doing. And you have to all know that she has been working, and in 2020, she was an environmental justice fellow and natural justice in Kenya. Her interest in gender inclusion has informed her work with the community leadership and women to incorporate gender issues in the land's rights struggle. So if you wanna go, and we just have some minutes or 2 minutes for questions, please go to menti.com, and we just share in the chat 4621. Yeah, there it is. You can go to Menti right now. Try to make, if you have some questions for Milka, is the time to reach her and get her knowledge, so you can also use her experience on these topics, on your lands, on your actions, and let's do this all together. Also, guys, don't forget that we have this open doc. In our feedback, we were reading that we need more interaction, and we were thinking that one of the ways is with this open doc. So go to the open doc that we shared at the beginning, or go to the menti.com and make some questions to Milka. This amazing activist and change maker, so important. I was so impressed what you said about what is really conservation and why a lot of organizations are just focusing on what is still conserved, and we are sometimes not looking around of what we already destroyed, and we should start to recover. As the Global Youth Coalition, I will say, we can do it. We have to start recovering our lands. We have to start planting trees, start to planting mangroves, start to recovering the coral as well. So right now, let's go with the questions, and I'm waiting for some questions to get here. And meanwhile, so how can you, Milka, how can youth advocates from the global north help indigenous people in their fight against conservation organizations? What an important question. Should I repeat it, or you got it?
Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah, sure, Milka. We are here together. How can youth advocates from the global north help indigenous people in their fight against conservation organizations? How can the people in the global north help people like you, basically?
I think generally is for you to inform yourself on what is happening, and so offer support as per requests. Sometimes it's hard, or sorry, I will say this, but I'm sorry if it will be inappropriate, but sometimes it doesn't make sense when people do an advocacy strategy about Indigenous people, even if it is the right advocacy, without the involvement of Indigenous people, even if it is in the North or whatever. So it has to be based on knowledge and request from Indigenous people. Say for
Great, Milka. Another important question. I'm lose you. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Now we are having the African climate happening soon in Nairobi. Now we're having the African Climate Change Summit happening in Nairobi next month. And Indigenous people are already organizing themselves to put out is it asks? Yeah, asks on why Indigenous people's issues haven't been included even in the planning of the summit. And going ahead into the summit, we know that Indigenous people's issues will not be conserved, despite the fact that this is building up to what is going to happen in COP28 next year. You know, and the end of the year. So it's so waiting for such kind of an opportunity and coming through to support what the movements are. Yeah.
Or the movements that are trying to advocate for these important actions. And this, of course, the second question that we don't have more time for, but is what's giving you hope in the battle that Indigenous people are facing. And I guess that we are more and more over getting included in this process. Like what's going on next week in Nairobi is something that gives me personally hope, and I think that is also for you as well. So that's it with Milka. Let's go with our amazing champ. Who's the champ? Frederick. Come, Frederick. Join us.
Okay. I hope everyone is fine. And my name is Frederick Binamungu, coming from Tanzania. And I hope I'm audible, right?
Yes, we can hear you, Frederick.
Okay. My name is Frederick Binamungu, coming from Tanzania, founder of Youth Power Initiative and project manager by professional, youth climate advocate and champion, African representative, and research coordinator from CC Tanzania organization. I am over the moon to facilitate this training today. Let's embrace the knowledge. Okay. I'm excited to introduce Erika Xananine Calvillo Ramirez, a young leader who truly making a difference. Elika's strong determination, talent, and hard work show us all how amazing young people can be. Our accomplishment inspire us all, and we are lucky to have her here with us today. Welcome, Elika. And she is a dynamic force as a community organizer and advocate for water and climate justice, proudly representing her indigenous Ngiwa heritage. She's currently pursuing her Latin America study degree at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. She's the visionary founder of La Tracasa Compartida, a youth-led grassroots movement and an influential advocate for the plant-based integrative food system through laws in Veg International Youth Board, and as a project leader for Langado, Gaia Legaia. So you're welcome, Xananine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And also, Frederick, for that introduction. Yes, my name is Shannon, and I'm going to be presenting to you more about the context, specifically of Indigenous people and the land movement in Latin America. So, yeah, also very happy to answer your questions later. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. You can see it now, right?
Yes, it's charging.
Okay. Yes. So yeah, we're gonna cover specifically like the role indigenous people can have in the UNFCCC processes, but overall like UNF processes and just political processes. So to start a bit with a context of Latin America and Mexico, which is what I know more about because I live here and I also study like professionally this territory. Just to give you some numbers, there are about 522 indigenous communities in Latin America that speak 420 different languages, and actually the majority of countries in Latin America are composed by 3 to 10% of indigenous people. So despite being a minority, as also Milka said, there is also a lot of people that are conserving the environment. So first, to give like an overview of our story and why I believe it's important that Latin America is recognized as a place where land defense has been a solution for the climate change and is also a climate action solution, is because we share a story with a lot of countries and regions in the world, also with Africa. So colonization has been an historical and ongoing process that has led to the systematic dispossession of land and the means of self-sustainment in these territories. Because before the colonizers came here and they say they discovered the continent, people were actually inhabiting this place, and they have been keeping all those forms of living that are different from Western societies. And through a process of national integration, that this happened later in history when all the countries in Latin America decided to be independent from the colonizer, when they created these nation states by themselves, indigenous people were not part of that creation of a nation. But then they were sort of integrated through a national identity. So in Mexico, there is this narrative around how we are the product of like the collision of two worlds, from the Western societies and indigenous communities. But actually what happened was that indigenous people were taken of their identity and they were neglected their identity so they could like integrate into a narrative of the colonizers, the Spanish. And this happened in different ways in Latin America, because southern in the region, in the Patagonia, in the Tierra del Fuego, this happened through genocide. So indigenous communities were murdered so the colonizers could take over their lands, and this created an identity for the nation that did not include it in a equitable way, indigenous communities, but they were actually just like used, and their lands used as resources. So this led to what we know today, like to the world as it is now in our region, because since the beginning, like the capitalist system has been keeping moving by the extractivism, not only of the territories, but also the work and the lives of the people inhabiting this place, which were for most part indigenous communities, and that now are trying to keep resisting. So when our nations in Latin America were included into the global system, the global market, we were included in a undeveloped place, in a dependent place, because we were used, and we are still used as resources. We are, as also in the beginning, the the video said, right? That it's like we were like the lives that sustain the supermarkets, the lives that sustain the oil companies, the lives that sustain the mining companies. So all this money that is created around the world often comes from global South communities being exploited and their lands being taken from them. So we can say now that the development in the specifically northern societies and the development in the developed countries has been made through creating sacrifice zones in Latin America and the global South. So why is this important? Because as we said, and as Milka said, there is this issue around what is protecting indigenous lands, right? What is allowing them to keep the communal property of the places they have ancestrally been inhabiting. As I said, I am also part and descendant of an indigenous community, and I wanna explain about the example of Mexico to give an insight of what regions in this specific country have been inhabited right now, are being inhabited by people that identify themselves as indigenous. So we can see a pattern with this map. I want you to put close attention to it. Where is distributed like the people that recognize themselves? You can see all these colors that represent, gray represents like 40 to 60% concentration of indigenous people, and red like 70% and more. So we can see a pattern with this map and the next one. This map is about the priority natural places in Mexico. So like the places that are necessary to sustain not only like the balance in this country, but also in the region. So we can see that where indigenous people are is where nature is being conserved. As Milka said, this is not like random. It's because indigenous people have been preserving and defending the land that is necessary to sustain all life. And this is an example of Mexico, but this happens all across the region and globally. So we now know about data. The World Wildlife Fund says that 80% of global biodiversity is protected by indigenous people. So we can say that recognizing our history, it is necessary that indigenous people have a right to their land and to be given their land back, because when indigenous people are in a place, they, as of, you know, the cosmology and as of ways of life need, we consider as we part of nature. That is why land is also part of ourselves, and that is why it's not only being conserved, but it's being protected, like defended. And we now can go into what are the conflicts in here, right? Because as we said, as we have seen in the other maps, where indigenous people are, there is where biodiversity is, but also it is where conflicts are happening. This is a map of only mining conflicts, but there are conflicts with a lot of industries, like agribusiness industries, like clothing industries, oil drilling industries, right? So also in these places that are necessary to sustain the life of indigenous people and of the world, in these places is where the capital is intended to take more wealth through land, through making life profit. So it's important to also see this map of the conflicts, because there is also a map of the environmental justice conflicts that are environmental justice atlas. That what it does is that it represents these kind of conflicts that are happening across the region. And this atlas also says that in South America, there is indigenous participation in 345 conflicts of the 626 registered ones across the world. And 125 of those are happening in Latin America and Central America, specifically also in Mexico. So we can talk as well that there is a dynamic of environmental racism and violence, because where indigenous people are and where nature is being protected is where companies and governments are trying to extract wealth from. So we know that countries and companies are being protected by police and military. So in Mexico and Central America, there's also no, like, it's not random that there are a lot of dangerous places in these areas, because it is where conflicts are happening, like interest conflicts. And yeah, it's like a war as well between who are trying to defend all of us and trying to defend nature, and those that are trying to defend their privilege and their wealth. So this is something that we have to keep in mind when we also talk about increasing climate action, because who are the ones that are also destroying the world and who are the ones that are defending it, right? And the ones that are defending it in Latin America are being murdered. 40% of the murdered environmental defenders in 2021 were from indigenous communities. And this is from a report of Global Witness that also said that in 2021, Mexico and Colombia were the most dangerous places to be an environmental defender. So we see that there's a dynamic in here, right? That comes from the colony up until the global society, right? So what is indigenous people doing, right? In front of this system. In Mexico, there is this concept around territory body. That is like the understanding that we are because the land is, that we are because everything is. And this is represented in, like, very specifically through food, right? Because what we nurture ourselves from is what nurtures land as well. That is why it is so important in a lot of indigenous communities to be fed from what we have around us, right? So yeah, we also said that there are conflicts on agribusiness and animal farming industries, but what indigenous people do is that we have sovereignty of food, and we create these regenerative systems where people from the community are being fed by the work of the community without exploiting something else. And this also relates to the territory land concept, which is also that the territory and the whole nature earth are part of this system, like symbiotic system, that in order to sustain life, in order to sustain everything, needs from us. And this is not only something like spiritual, like cosmologic thing, but it's also like something very real and very material, because as we have seen in Western societies, people are sick, are sad, are like that because the environment is as well polluted, is as well dying. So what do we need to do, right? Defending land. And there are a lot of ways indigenous people defend land. Like what I do is one way, but there are many collectives across all struggles, like social struggles, climate struggles, that are working towards there. So there's this network that is called Indigenous Futures Network, that are people from Mexico, Central America, Latin America.
Xananine,
yes?
1 minute to conclude.
Oh yeah, of course. And yes, there is, this about how in times of climate crisis, the future is a territory to defend. So I just want to cover quickly like the spaces where indigenous people are influencing and representing themselves through different political processes. And this is covered through the right of self-determination and land rights of indigenous people, that it is being recognized by the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights and the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. But why there is like, even though these frameworks exist, a lot of people are still not being like protected and their lands protected. So there are different ways in which communities are tackling this. There is autonomous territories that create their own way to manage land and manage themselves, which are like self-sustained governments that do not recognize like the power of the state. There is also indigenous people involuntary isolation. That is also a different way of they sustaining their own life. And there is also like councils and liaisons that influence the government, which are like, for example, the CNE in Mexico, which is like the Congress of Indigenous Government, and the liaison of continental women of Las Americas. And so there are different ways in how indigenous people are influencing government and are influencing the way they do politics. And talking about the UN, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, is a body where also indigenous people have representation at the level of the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, but within the UNFCCC, which is on climate change, there is like the Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change that is being represented by also the Indigenous Forum of the Abya, which is like the way indigenous people call Latin America. And so yeah, it's composed by these communities and the people that are following the negotiations on climate change and that are supporting their territorial demands towards these spaces. It is important because a lot of people in Latin America that have been threatened and that have been persecuted by the states have been able to come to these places to represent the interests of their territories and their communities. And the recently created as well a body for young indigenous people is the International Indigenous Youth Forum, that is also part of the Indigenous Caucus in the United Nations Climate Change, and that is also a body that we can follow through and we can support. So what I wanted to like show through this presentation was that there is this need to decolonize climate action, and that indigenous people, as we have said a lot, are the ones defending life, defending nature, having the climate solutions. And there are many ways in which indigenous peoples do this. There are different ways of defending the territory, of raising the ambition on climate action. And I believe that we must support all of these processes, all of these communities and struggles obviously in different ways. But what is important from each one of us is to territorialize our actions and putting life at the center. So what we do in these international spaces also defends the territory we are from. And this is something that I want to leave like everyone to think of. What is the territory, your territory, that you need to defend? And that's it. Thank you.
Wow, that's an impressive one. Wow. So it's a 5-minute Q&A. Welcome to the Q&A session where your curiosity and insight take center stage. Your question dive to the heart of our conversation. So please don't hesitate to share your thoughts. So don't hold back. Your question contribute to the depths and length of our exploration. So we want to open the Menti and you submit your question there. Okay, here's the question. Submit the question for someone new, and I have the question dropping by. So the question is popping. So let's do this. Okay, how can indigenous people be made an integral part of ecosystem conservation and restoration project? Can I repeat, Xananine?
Yes.
Yes, it's how can indigenous people be made an integral part of ecosystem conservation and restoration project.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, as I said, I believe that one really important part is by first recognizing like the right of people to their own land and to manage their own land. You know, there's this self-determination um, right that they have. So this is something that it's really needs to be accounted for in conservation projects, because oftentimes as well, like areas of conservation are being like reduced, and when they are not reduced, they are also like taking people out of there. So there is not something that needs to be separated but actually integrated, so that international solidarity can also like call for indigenous peoples to be integrated into political processes, not by just validating the agendas of government or companies, but by validating like their own claims over their land.
Okay, another one I think that's very important and vital to address is there any danger of indigenous knowledge remaining with the older generation? How does the indigenous future look like, and with the increase of globalization?
Yes, I believe that also is an important struggle as well, because as we have said, it's not that indigenous peoples we lost like a lot of our knowledge or our own language actually because we wanted to, but because you know the whole process of colonization, our ancestors were discriminated for being themselves, you know, for being indigenous, for speaking our language, and it is something that it does happen because of the influence of the global society. But also, I believe that there is hope in this future as well, because the global society is becoming like more aware of how do we need of these knowledges to keep preserving life as we know it and even beyond. And yeah, I believe that there is ongoing effort in indigenous communities to restore those knowledges and also like pass them on to the next generation, so they do not stay with our ancestors but that are part of an indigenous future, but also recognizing that in some future we do not want to be like just indigenous or called indigenous, you know, we want to be ourselves, we want to be our own communities. I also did not recognize myself as indigenous before someone else told me, because before I was just Ngiwa, you know, I was me, I was my family, and you know, this is also like a colonial term, you know, by trying to homogenize all communities when we all are different.
So in a second, Xananine Ramirez, is you are remark for the young people, indigenous young people. For the
Yeah, a
second,
remark.
yeah.
Yeah, a remark I would say as well is to embrace everything that you have learned from in your territory, and to know that that is important to preserve life on earth, and that we need of every one of our voices and every one of each one of our experiences to go through this struggle collectively.
Okay, thank you very much, and I would appreciate that everyone who dropped the question to the mentee, and I think all the question have been gathered out and will be sent to Xananine, and I think follow up into our social media, and the I think the response will be sent into email. So thank you very much, Xananine, and we appreciate having you here today. Okay, so before we continue, let's take a well-deserved break to recharge our mind. It's not just a 5 minute break, but an opportunity to refuel our energy and return with renewed enthusiasm. So go ahead and stretch your legs and grab refreshing drinks and take a moment to relax. We will be back shortly to drive back. Enjoy your break. Okay. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a refreshing break and recharged for the rest of our session. We're all set to continue our journey of exploration and learning. So let us pick up where we left off and dive deeper into our training. And if you're ready, let's dive right back, guys. Okay. To continue, we have a very special special trainer, and this is Elik Milal. But first, let's go. It is a pleasure to have you with us in this session. Your presence bring a unique perspective and wealth of experience that will undoubtedly enrich our topic. Thank you for joining us today, and we are eager to develop into your amazing music. Elik is an indigenous person from the Patano wetland in Mato Grosso do Sul, and amplifies through his music the power of indigenous ancestors, echoing the struggle of the original people and their Lord. Besides being a DJ and music producer, Elik Trainer is an co-indigenizing member of Media Indigena, along with other young people seeking to strengthen indigenous communication, art, and the use of social media for climate education, showing the role of indigenous people in the territory, maintain and the protection of Mother Earth. Now, I would like to toss the mic to AJ. I would like to toss the mic for the Elik Talena. You're welcome.
Hello.
Elike. Wow, we can hear you audibly. Welcome.
Yes. Hi everyone, I'm Erika Xananine from Brazil. I just tend to translate, excuse me. Ok. Agora sim, eu posso falar em português para a tradução.
Can I speak Portuguese now? Can you hear me well? Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Being here with other young people and being able to talk about my music and talk about ancestral knowledge. I come from the Terena, Indigenous Peoples, and today I'd like to introduce some of my music to you. I didn't have time to regulate the sound, but I want to ask you if you can hear the music that I'm playing right now. Can you hear it?
No escuchamos aún nada, solo tu voz.
No, we cannot hear anything, just your voice, but we're really excited,
we are excited to hear, but
Thank
we can hear
you so
only
much.
your voice.
I'm going to switch up things here and I'll start in
then
a
I will
quick
change
second.
some of my tools here and we'll start in just a second.
Let's go.
Ahora estás, no escuchamos todavía. Vaya ahí, a tope.
Now we're able to hear.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much. Elika, can you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's amazing. I hope everyone is dancing now. Everyone is moving like, woo! Hey, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elik. It was very fun to have you around. And oh, it's amazing. It's like we are in a club now. Oh, no, we're back in training. Thank you very much and welcome back. So I would like to thank you very much for having me around. And now I would like to toss the mic to AJ, the chair, who will guide us through the next segment. AJ, over to you, my brother. Go ahead.
Of course. Hey, here you go. Now I'm AJ as well. And everyone was like, ooh, ooh, eh, eh. But you know what's also as amazing, so as Eric, is the amazing platform that I'm showing you right now in the screen, like terra.do. If you are still not there, what are you waiting? What are you waiting? Go right now and go to terra.do. We will go .do and then it's super easy. You just have to go to Terra, then you go there, join the community. What is important, this is really important. It's really important. You have to go with the same email or Gmail or whatever email that you are using, that we are sending you the emails from the Oxford Net Zero training program. And then you will sign with this email. You will get into this part, join the community. You have to agree here. Then you will have a bit quite long questions, but this is important because you will get personalized content. Imagine, and all for free. And then you end up here finding our terra.do. And what's the more important part of it? Alexis was telling me, Agustin, you have to let them know that you have the highlights here, and you can just easily press here, and you will find a way to download the calendar that will synchronize your calendar in your phone with our sessions. This is really important. Then finally, you have like all the events, all the weeks that we have been training together. Let's go to week number 6, mitigation, read more, what was going on there. We open here and and then what was open here, then we have the classes, class 6 again, class 5, and we have introduction, public finance, the role of private finance, and then you press there and you will go automatically in your own language. I'm still not logged in, that's why it's not working for me, but if you do it correctly, not as I did, you will just end into this amazing platform where you can have all the resources, all the course info, what's going on, what will take place later on. And this was super fast because we are a bit late, and we don't want to be late because we know that all of you guys have a lot of stuff to do, right? So 1 second, let's go here. And right now I'm gonna introduce Ana Eloisa Romero Flores, and she's gonna present us that what she's about to do is in Spanish, so taking count that some part of the presentations are not translated completely. So try to understand us that we are all doing big efforts. There's Ana Eloisa Romero Flores. Ana is an activist, documentary maker. Wow, you're a documentary maker. We have to talk later on. Ana, tenemos que hablar después. Ana, me interesaría saber qué documentales.
Ana, I would like to know what documentaries you have been working on.
In Paraguay, and an expert of Guarani ancestral medicine. Oh, I want to be your friend, Ana. I quiero ser tu amigo. Increíble. Ana is from Upper Chaco Mariscal Estigarribia and has 15 years of work experience in national and international realms, always in defense of land, in defense of territory, of indigenous people, and bringing indigenous voices to different spaces of participation and decision. She has a Bachelor of Arts International Relations and is the director member of the National Indigenous Articulation for a Dignified Life. She's a founder and president of the Indigenous Youth Union of Paraguay, in addition to former candidate for deputy for Central Department of Paraguay. And she has worked in the public institutions like INDI and INE, and also worked with private companies and indigenous NGOs. And before we jump with Ana, we just want to remember, Eric, te queremos hacer un par de preguntas. We want to make you some questions as well. If you can wait till the end because we are a bit late, but we are youngsters and we can give us some minutes. So, vamos, Ana, contigo. Estamos muy contentos de estar hoy contigo.
Ana, we're very happy to be here with you today. And now your slides as a result of magic, if you will appear on the screen. So let's focus all of us together and make sure that the slides appear on the screen. Ana, we can now see your presentation, so we wish you the best of luck. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. My name is Ana Romero from the Guarani people in Paraguay in South America, and I would like to touch upon a very important topic. I will be presenting a perspective on what's going on in Paraguay and other regions of South America as well. I am in a region known as the Gran Chaco, Western Chaco, that covers 3 countries, Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay. That said, this region is part of the desert. It is a very dry region. And now to the point. I will focus, as I said before, on a very important topic. I would like to present key concepts from indigenous peoples, our worldviews, which are of utmost importance for all of us. Land, the earth, which is mother to all of us, mother to the universe, to our systems. It is the mother that shelters, surrounds, and humanizes us all. That is the concept that we, indigenous peoples, have about the land, about Mother Earth. Now, as far as territories are concerned, these are main components. These are the driving force behind not only historical continuity, but also the fullness of life for us, indigenous peoples, through spirituality and social, cultural, economic, political, and human development. This is all consistent with our worldview, which, as I said before, well, every people has a worldview, and in every case, it is based on a profound relationship with Mother Earth. Therefore, there is a profound relationship with life. Our very humanity can only come into fullness through Mother Earth. Land and territory are intertwined, of course, with life. And for us, for indigenous families and communities, we can thrive in our territories. Now let's move on to the next slide. These concepts are fundamental, as many of my colleagues said before. Can we move on to the next slide? Yes, thank you. Okay, let's focus now on the impact of some practices on Paraguay. Paraguay is divided into two main regions, the Western region, or the Chaco region, and the Eastern region. And what's going on here? 19 indigenous peoples are present in Paraguay, and in both regions, we are confronted with many issues. Although they are different, we are confronted with similar issues. On the one side, there is the Western region, the region I come from originally, that's my territory. And what are some examples of the impact on our territory? Deforestation, of course, droughts. I would say this is the main issue in our region. Disguise, exploitation, and slavery. And why am I mentioning this? Because the only source of labor in our region is livestock. So that's the only source of labor. And we, indigenous peoples, are in many cases cheap labor. That's why some actors have a lot of power and benefit from our communities. Members of indigenous peoples work in the fields, in livestock fields, and in many cases they are victims of exploitation. They work 24 hours a day and don't have any type of labor rights. And since this region is devoted to livestock, grassland fires are very frequent in our territory. And in 2019, 2020, I believe, in the midst of the pandemic, the Amazon forest was also affected by fires, and we were affected by this, of course. All of us indigenous peoples were affected by this, and especially those peoples that were in voluntary isolation. These grassland fires, of course, affect our communities on a very regular basis. Now, high livestock production. In El Chaco, cows have more rights than members of indigenous communities. So there is high livestock production. There is also a large-scale expansion of soybean monocultures. This is something that used to be more salient in the eastern region, but now it's also a big issue in El Chaco. So agribusiness is now playing an important role in this context. And of course, the extinction of wild animals. Animals are sacred to us. We see them as being our brothers and sisters, and we are the only means to protect them. And why? Because many times animals in our communities, animals that are at risk of becoming extinct, come to us because their territories are being destroyed because of the droughts, and also because they need food. Since forests are being depleted and destroyed, they come to our indigenous communities to seek refuge. On the other hand, there is the eastern region where more human rights violations are taking place. Agriculture expanded tremendously, the soybean monocultures business expanded, and something that has been happening very frequently from 2019 until 2022 is continuous forced and in some cases violent displacement. In 2021, 13 indigenous communities were displaced in a very violent fashion. This is something that we have been seeing on a very regular basis, so much so that it seems to be normalized. In just 1 week, 3 or 4 indigenous communities may be displaced. Another issue, which is very common throughout Latin America, a political issue too, of course, is drug trafficking. Armed groups and criminal groups are main actors in this situation, and they represent a threat. In some cases, rural to urban migration translates into racism and discrimination because urban societies, in most cases, see us as being lazy, see us as not being able to produce, and that's not the case. So there is a lot of violence of every kind. Also, human trafficking and smuggling. These two issues are also present in the Eastern region. Also, criminalization of leaders. I myself was a victim of a weapon when I was defending an indigenous family. And as an activist, as an environmental defender, you are confronted with these situations. Last but not least, the expansion of extractivism within territories and throughout the whole country. And the peoples that suffer the most are indigenous peoples. This, of course, translates into continuous migration to capital cities because we need to seek refuge. The country as a whole, based on our national constitution, considers us to be second-class citizens, and we are considered to be migrants within our own country in big cities. Let's move on to the next slide. Something else that we see when trying to protect our land and territories on the media is disinformation. The press plays an active role in forced displacement because they convey wrong information when we are displaced from our territories. They spread disinformation. And this clearly shows that not only our land is being taken away from us, but we're also we don't have access to education, to culture. There is violence against children. This all in all translates into generalized discrimination. We lack legal means to seek protection. Although the law says that we have the right to free social benefits, that we have the right to our ancestral land, that doesn't really translate into concrete benefits in reality. The media continues to spread, to disseminate wrong information. If an indigenous community is violently displaced, they don't really tell the truth and they don't care about our suffering. In the end, we are people, we are human beings like them. And we are not like they usually say invaders. We are not invaders of our own land. We live in our territories, in territories that are rightfully ours, and sometimes the Paraguayan society refers to us as indigenous peoples from Paraguay, but We also suffer from violence, political violence, economic violence as well. We suffer from every angle. And not only that, our sacred places are also violated, and we can see that in some of the pictures disseminated on social media. A spiritual leader was murdered in a sacred place from the Paupetera community. And that was the ultimate result of the violence that we indigenous peoples have been victims from. This leader died defending our land, territories, and our lives. This is what I wanted to share with you. Next slide, please. Fortunately, there are also some allied media that also show the other face of the situation we are confronted with. We are victims of displacement, indeed, and there are interests behind, political interests of some actors of society, and the commodities usually come first in detriment of our peoples. And what we want to do is to protect ourselves from the interests of other sectors that focus only on economy and commodities in detriment of life itself. And life itself includes biodiversity and our diversity of peoples, humankind diversity as well. So there are also allied media that show the other face of what's going on. Next slide. So this is what's really happening. If we have a look at the slides, we will see pictures from a community that was evicted, that was displaced in the central department near the country's capital, Asunción. They migrated 30 years ago. Why? Because they were against the system, a capitalist, extractivist system where natural resources don't really matter, and they pollute and do this to the environment in the name of development. These communities were victims of violence and human rights violations, and we as indigenous peoples would like to convey a message. There is a new generation of people that want to start a new discussion in Paraguay. These new generations will be confronted with similar issues, and the children that now live in the midst of this situation are also acquire knowledge. Our elders are becoming older every day, so we need the new generations as well. At the regional level, we are the second country with highest deforestation rates. That's our reality. Next slide. Something else I would like to say is that data presented to the media by government authorities are not trustworthy in all cases because they don't really reflect the reality that we are confronted with. They don't really, what they truly reflect is the lack of policies to protect territorial rights, land rights. In most cases, the media say that they mentioned that there is no deforestation, and that's of course not the case. Next slide. As a result, that development, the type of development that they defend, goes against the environment. They say that we have rich natural resources, but also do everything, all they can, everything in their power to evict indigenous peoples in the name of development. The government doesn't really involve indigenous peoples in their defense actions for the environment. In Paraguay, there are diverse and different types of ecosystems. And we indigenous peoples have access to different resources through extractivist projects. What they are doing is to deplete and the environment and kill us silently. That's what we're going through at the moment. Next slide. That said, well, let's focus now on the role and status of indigenous women. It is also our responsibility to take action. We need to have priorities. Water to us plays a fundamental role in our region. For us, it plays a fundamental role, and we as a country have the largest drinking water reserves in Latin America. So we as women have a huge responsibility. We need to make sure that the next generations are not confronted with water scarcity issues. The water issue, therefore, should be at the core of our defense actions. So the role of women is of paramount importance in that regard. Let's move on to the next slide. So with all the previous considerations in mind, with everything that I showed you, the following questions arise. What is the problem? Is it maybe us? Is it women? Do we women need to find solutions, convey knowledge, share knowledge, or are the new generations responsible for making sure that our temporary world changes? Or is it us, the youth, that now have the opportunity to raise our voices, to take advantage of every possible opportunity to make sure that the voices of indigenous peoples raise so as to defend our territories, to defend our peoples in every possible dimension? Let's move on to the next slide. Now, the importance of supporting indigenous land claims as a means to protect human rights. Why? Because we suffer the consequences of environmental damage and that destruction of forests by third parties. And these third parties are a minority, but their impact on our territories is large. Now, indigenous organizations and communities are constantly denouncing that our forests are being depleted, for example, that development has an idea of development has a negative impact on our peoples. And our goal is not to hinder development. That's not our goal. We want to raise our voices in all possible spaces, such as the UN, COPs, and we do so not to hinder the development model of our country, but to make sure that all these minority third parties acknowledge the impact that's now affecting us. Because what they are truly doing is disrespecting humanity in all its diversity. Because the truth is that we exist and resist. Next slide. This is my struggle. I am an activist, as Agustin mentioned before. I have 15 years of experience at the national and international levels as a defender of indigenous lands and territories. I have been I also have extensive knowledge in Guarani ancestral medicine. And I use these spaces and opportunities to make sure that we can all get involved, that we can all participate in this struggle, which will not benefit just a minority, but humanity as a whole. So thank you very much for allowing me to take the floor in this space.
How important is to listen people like Ana, Chananin, Milka today. Muchas gracias, Ana, por tus aportes. Well, if you wanna follow Ana, wait, I need to make a photo of this because I wanna get in contact with you later on as well. So if you want to follow Anna, or right now, if you want to make some questions, go to the Mentimeter and throw a question over there for Anna. And we have some questions already. You showed the impact of the detrimental narratives about indigenous people. What are the best means to challenge the legacy of... ya, entonces, Ana, tu charla nos muestra el impacto de las narrativas perjudiciales sobre los pueblos indígenas en lo de los medios, ¿no? De comunicación que mencionaste. ¿Cuáles son
you were mentioning the impact of negative narratives on indigenous peoples. What are the best ways of challenging the legacy of these colonial narratives? What do you think, Anna? What I have learned is the following. There was a process of getting informed, of showing everyone that, well, our generation has access to technologies, to information. It's a very important means to make everything visible, to show what is real. Because the media don't always tell the whole truth. We can also raise our voices and tell our truth and tell what our reality is, because we are what we live, and we show that through social media. Technologies have been helping us a lot. So now we have the means to create a new narrative. People of my generation are doing a lot. They're saying, hey, no, this is the reality. It's not what they say. Don't always believe everything the media say. Please listen to all the parties. This is what we're working on.
Thank you. It's so important, as you say, to showcase the solutions that the youth people is doing, hacer visible las soluciones y las luchas que nosotros estamos teniendo en las redes.
It's important what young people are doing on social media.
Queremos agradecer, Ana, por este espacio. Y la última
Thank you, Anna, for being here. Last question before we leave is, do you believe that UNFCCC is adequately equipped to include the perspectives of indigenous peoples? And if so, what can be done to improve this? I'm so sorry. I speak Spanish. This is why I'm speaking Spanish. But again, how can we include the perspectives of indigenous peoples? I don't know if this is going to be misinterpreted or not, but last year I learned a lot participating in COP. I was part of a delegation, and I could see the difference between participating at COP as part of the official delegation, because it's there where negotiations happen, there where voices are raised. But it's often the voice of the state, not the voice of the indigenous peoples of the rural areas. The social communities are in another area. We are represented there, okay, but we're not part of the negotiations. We are part of some nodes that the governments need to take into account. So we need to train more negotiators. And we need those negotiators to be part of the state. You're absolutely right, Anna. Thank you, Anna, for participating here.
But Anna doesn't understand English, so for me it's important that she understand what I'm saying. Para mí es importante, Ana, que entiendas lo que estoy diciendo, entonces pues por eso hablo en los dos idiomas. Increíble.
It's important for me to make sure Anna is understanding me. That's why I'm speaking in both languages. It's amazing what you're doing, Anna.
In general, it was amazing to have all these amazing speakers, Anna, Xananine, Milka, these different ways of approaching the solutions and the climate change. How can we tackle then climate change? And also to showcase and to advocate for indigenous rights, for the importance of getting to know how there's, for example, Shannon was commenting us today when we were watching at the map there, like most of the green zones of Mexico are actually places where indigenous communities have been fighting. And actually WFF was mentioning that 80% of these lands are protected by indigenous. Milka was sharing us the important question of what does it really mean conservation? What does it mean that some organizations are intending to just protect or limiting themselves into the conserved lands, but we are forgetting about what we already destroyed. And then with Anna, we were learning how there's people that for the last 30 years have been removed from their lands. But also what I think that we have to highlight from Anna's part is what she mentioned about COP27 when she was in Sharm el Sheikh as well. And she's telling us that what's the difference when you are a party member of your delegation and you are going with the government officially, but you are getting into an agenda that it was already negotiated before, and how is the difference when you are going as a party stakeholder or actually as a observer, as a civil society, where you are also intending to make an impact by protesting and by taking actions inside this conference of parties. Later on, and last but not least, we were also having today different ways of doing activism, like the amazing Eric Terena from Brazil. He was showing us how is Eric Terena doing his activism. He's showcasing indigenous music, indigenous sounds, nature sounds, to make people understand with how he looks, what he uses, to make people understand that there's people in the Amazon, that there's people in the communities that they are also enjoying music, they are also enjoying life, and they need and they deserve as well respect, and they deserve as well to have the same rights as we all have. Like, was a bit shocking for me to listen from Anna that there's some places where cows that are being used for agricultural purposes are actually having more rights than some indigenous communities. It cannot be like that. But also something that Anna mentioned before she closed is that how important it is for us as the global youth to get trained, to get the information, and to get into this program. So thank you all that to all our presenters. It was such a kind session. Thank you all of you. Don't forget that we have Slack, we have Instagram, we have LinkedIn. Try to remember your partners, the people that you know that is also taking the course, to watch the sessions in YouTube. We have all the sessions in the different languages that are available. There's a lot of people making a big effort for making this to happen for all of us as youth, as humanity, because we are one. And for us, it's really important that we understand how we can make this planet a sustainable, a brighter place for all of us not 10 years in the future, but today already. This is the Oxford Net Zero Global Youth Training Program. I'm Agustin Ocaña, also known as Pacha Tupac, and thank you all for having us here. And the next session on 6th of September, 2 days before my birthday, we are having the climate litigation with environmental lawyer and researcher Mirlani Shinde, also with a medic activist and representative of the People Health Tribunal of Shell, Rhiannon Osborne, and the co-chair of Face Intergenerational Justice, Trina Chimi. Next session, 6th of September. Check your agenda. You know that you have to be here, 4 p.m. UK time, climate litigation, the session number 10. So we were really happy. We learned a lot today, and we are happy to see you next session with the amazing partners that we have. And don't forget that you have to join us on Slack. And for, of course, important, thank you to our funders and contributors, Net Zero University of Oxford, the Van Houten Fund, Insight, the Smith School Enterprise and the Environment, and of course the people that is on the back making these amazing translations, the eco interpreters, guys. So thank you all for today's session. And don't forget that we have the En-ROADS that we present some sessions before. You can check the links as well in the last session, and you can go there and check the scenario, the different data that you can have there with the greenhouse gas net emissions.
AJ, before ending, before saying bye bye, I would like to appreciate Elik's performance, and I think all of you you'd like to follow him on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and everywhere, so you can invite him in a different occasion. And thank you, Elik. I think you can drop by in the comment chat every social media that you're using, and welcome to the Slack. You will be welcoming you to showcase what you have, and people will welcome you so much. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you. And let's see you in the next Global Youth Climate Training. We are Global Youth Coalition, together or nothing. Ciao.